Fix my Porsche, and I'll marry you. The words echoed across the quiet square, with just enough laughter behind them to make everyone stop what they were doing. A few people chuckled. Someone pulled out a phone, expecting another harmless joke at the expense of the man in grease-stained jeans standing beside an aging pickup truck. No one noticed that he never looked embarrassed. No one noticed that he never looked impressed either. And absolutely no one imagined that less than 10 minutes later, the same joke would uncover a secret worth far more than $1 billion. The late afternoon sun poured golden light across Maple Ridge, Colorado, where old brick storefronts still carried faded family names and neighbors waved from front porches without checking who was watching. Ethan Walker tightened the last bolt beneath the hood of a weathered Ford F-150 before wiping his hands on a clean shop towel. At 38, he looked older than his years, not because life had been unkind, but because responsibility had quietly settled into every line around his calm blue eyes. His small repair garage sat beside the town's only gas station, a place where engines, coffee, and conversations all seemed to arrive at the same pace. Across the street, 8-year-old Lily Walker sat beneath the shade of an old maple tree with a sketchbook balanced on her knees, drawing classic sports cars she dreamed of seeing one day. Every few minutes she glanced toward her father, smiling simply because he was there. Ethan smiled back without saying a word. Some promises were kept in silence. The distant growl of a high-performance engine rolled through town before anyone saw it. Heads turned as a silver Porsche 911 Turbo eased on a main street, its polished paint reflecting storefront windows like liquid steel. The car slowed, coughed once, then coasted to a stop directly in front of Ethan's garage. The driver's door opened, and Claire Montgomery stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Her tailored ivory blazer, dark sunglasses, and effortless confidence made her seem completely out of place among dusty pickups and tractors waiting for repair. Everyone recognized her face from business, magazines, and television interviews. She was the billionaire founder and CEO of Montgomery Dynamics, one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. Claire removed her sunglasses, glanced at the Porsche with visible annoyance, then looked directly at Ethan. "You the mechanic?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "I fix what needs fixing." A playful smile crossed her face, half amusement, half challenge. "Tell you what," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Fix my Porsche, and I'll marry you." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Claire laughed softly at her own joke, expecting the quiet mechanic to blush or stumble over his words. Ethan simply walked toward the Porsche without answering. He opened the rear engine compartment with practiced hands, leaned forward, and studied the immaculate machinery in complete silence. At first, his expression remained calm. Then something changed. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, resting beside a factory wiring harness. Hidden so carefully that almost no one would ever notice it, was a tiny polished object that absolutely did not belong there. Ethan reached toward it slowly, his breathing steady, while every instinct earned through years of solving impossible mechanical mysteries whispered the same unsettling truth. This Porsche had not simply broken down. Someone had wanted it to be found exactly like this. Ethan did not remove the object immediately. Instead, he studied the tiny polished capsule resting beneath the factory wiring harness as though it were another language only machines could speak. His fingers hovered for a brief moment before he closed the engine compartment with deliberate care. "Your problem is not the engine," he said quietly. Claire folded her arms, amused by his unexpected confidence. "Then what is it?" Ethan looked at her without the slightest trace of drama. "Something inside this car does not belong there." The laughter around them faded into puzzled silence. Claire tilted her head. "Are you telling me someone tampered with my Porsche?" Ethan shrugged gently. "I'm saying I would rather inspect everything before I answer that question." She studied him for the first time without the playful smile. Most mechanics rush to prove themselves. Most people rush to impress her. This man did neither. He simply rolled his toolbox closer and began removing panels with slow, precise movements treating every bolt with the same respect a surgeon might give delicate instruments. Across the street, Lily quietly closed her sketchbook and walked over carrying 2 paper cups of lemonade from the diner next door. She smiled at her father before offering the second cup to Claire. "It gets pretty warm standing in the sun," she said softly. Claire blinked with surprise before accepting it. "Thank you." Lily nodded politely. "My dad says cars work better when people stop rushing." Claire looked down at the little girl and smiled despite herself. "Your father sounds like an interesting man." Lily grinned. "He fixes more than cars." Ethan heard the exchange, but continued working without interruption. He carefully disconnected a protective cover, exposing another section of the electrical system. Everything appeared spotless, almost too perfect. Whoever had worked inside this Porsche knew exactly what they were doing. There were no scratched bolts, no careless fingerprints, no loose connectors. Only tiny details that most technicians would never notice. Ethan's eyes settled on a faint mark hidden beneath a factory label. It was barely visible, yet it confirmed what had first caught his attention. Someone had installed a miniature electronic device using professional tools and extraordinary patience. Claire stepped closer. "Can you tell what it is?" Ethan remained calm. "Not yet. Can you remove it?" "Yes." "Then why are you waiting?" Ethan finally looked at her. "Because sometimes removing evidence answers one question and destroys 5 others." Claire said nothing. The confidence in his voice carried no pride, only quiet certainty. She had spent years sitting across polished conference tables surrounded by executives eager to speak first and think later. Ethan Walker was the opposite. Every word arrived only after careful thought. Every movement had purpose. An elderly customer watching from the gas pumps leaned toward the station owner and whispered, "That boy's always been like that." Even when he was fixing tractors in high school, he listened to engines the way other people listen to music. Claire overheard the comment and found herself unexpectedly curious. How could a mechanic in a forgotten mountain town remain so composed while standing beside one of the most expensive sports cars in America? Ethan reached into his toolbox and selected an inspection mirror no larger than a pocket watch. As sunlight reflected across the polished glass, he angled it beneath the hidden compartment. A tiny green light blinked once before disappearing again. His expression remained unchanged, but inside, one unmistakable realization settled into place. Whatever had been hidden inside Claire Montgomery's Porsche had not been placed there by accident, and whoever installed it expected the car to leave this little garage without anyone ever discovering it. Claire Montgomery had built an empire by trusting numbers more than people. Every quarterly report, every acquisition, every handshake had taught her that success depended on seeing what everyone else missed. Yet standing inside a modest repair garage that smelled of fresh coffee, motor oil, and sun-warmed concrete, she realized she had completely misjudged the quiet mechanic in front of her. Ethan carefully closed the inspection panel again before placing every tool back into its proper place. Nothing about his movements suggested urgency, even though his mind was already assembling pieces that refused to fit together by coincidence alone. Claire broke the silence first. "You have seen something?" Ethan nodded once. "Yes. Is my car safe to drive?" He hesitated for only a moment. "Not until I understand why that device is there." Claire removed her sunglasses and looked directly into his eyes. For the first time that afternoon, she was no longer speaking as the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She was simply a woman searching for an honest answer. "Then help me understand." Ethan leaned against the workbench, choosing his words with care. Modern vehicles collect enormous amounts of information. Location, speed, system, diagnostics, electronic signals. A hidden device can observe much more than people imagine. Claire frowned thoughtfully. "You think someone wanted information from me?" "I think someone invested a great deal of effort to place something where almost nobody would ever look." The afternoon breeze drifted through the open garage door, carrying the distant laughter of children playing in the town park. Lily sat on an old wooden stool nearby, quietly adding another page to her sketchbook. She had drawn her father beside the silver Porsche, both surrounded by rays of sunlight instead of expensive buildings. Claire noticed the drawing and smiled gently. Your daughter makes everything look hopeful. Ethan glanced toward Lily. She usually sees the best in people before I do. Claire lowered her eyes. Those words lingered longer than she expected. Hope had not been a familiar companion during the past few years. Since becoming the public face of Montgomery Dynamics, every interview, every gala, and every business dinner seemed to carry hidden agendas. Compliments often arrived attached to requests. Invitations usually came with negotiations. Even friendships sometimes disappeared the moment they stopped being useful. She had learned to protect herself with confidence, humor, and carefully measured distance. That was why she had joked so casually when she first stepped out of the Porsche. It was easier to laugh before anyone else had the chance. Ethan interrupted her thoughts without realizing it. May I ask you something? Claire nodded. Has anyone outside your company serviced this vehicle recently? She thought carefully. No, it has been maintained only by technicians approved through my executive office. Ethan remained silent. That answer only deepened his concern. An approved service network meant fewer opportunities for strangers, but greater opportunity for someone with trusted access. Claire noticed the subtle change in his expression. That answer was not the one you expected. No, Ethan admitted. It means whoever placed this inside your car understood your routines. Claire slowly looked back toward the Porsche. For the first time since buying the vehicle, she no longer admired its flawless curves or powerful engineering. She saw uncertainty. She saw questions. Most of all, she saw how quickly confidence could become vulnerability. Ethan picked up the tiny inspection mirror once more and turned it beneath the hidden compartment. This time another detail reflected back at him, almost invisible beneath the polished metal. A microscopic engraving. 2 simple letters surrounded by a small geometric symbol. Ethan had seen that exact marking once before many years earlier, and the memory returned with unsettling clarity. Ethan stared at the tiny engraved symbol for several quiet seconds before carefully lowering the inspection mirror onto the workbench. Claire noticed the unusual pause immediately. You recognize it, she said softly. Ethan did not answer at first. Outside, the familiar rhythm of small-town life continued without interruption. A delivery truck rolled past the hardware store. Wind chimes sang gently from a nearby porch. Somewhere across Main Street, an old church bell marked the half-hour. The peaceful sounds made the silence inside the garage feel even heavier. Finally, Ethan spoke. Many years ago, I worked on advanced automotive electronics for a defense contractor before I opened this garage. Claire's eyes widened with genuine surprise. You were an engineer? Ethan smiled faintly. For a while. Why leave? His expression drifted toward Lily, who remained happily sketching by the open garage door. Because there are careers you choose, and then there are people you choose. Claire followed his gaze toward the little girl and understood without another explanation. Ethan picked up a clean microfiber cloth and gently wiped away a thin layer of dust surrounding the hidden compartment. The engraved letters became easier to see. They were so small that an ordinary inspection would never reveal them. This marking belongs to a custom manufacturer, he explained. They build specialized electronic hardware. High precision. Very expensive. Not something anyone buys at an auto parts store. Claire stepped closer. Who would have access to something like that? Ethan looked back toward the Porsche. Large corporations. Government contracts. Private research firms. Anyone with enough resources. Claire folded her arms, her thoughtful expression replacing the confidence that usually accompanied every public appearance. Montgomery Dynamics works with several advanced technology partners. Ethan nodded slowly. Then the list is both shorter and more complicated. Lily quietly walked over carrying a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. She held it toward Claire with an innocent smile. Mrs. Thompson from next door made these this morning. She always sends extra. Claire accepted one almost automatically before laughing to herself. I cannot remember the last time someone offered me a cookie without asking for something in return. Lily tilted her head with childlike honesty. Maybe they just like you. Claire looked down at the little girl, unexpectedly touched by words so simple they carried no calculation at all. Ethan watched the exchange with quiet gratitude. Lily had inherited her late mother's ability to soften even the hardest moments without realizing she was doing it. Claire took a small bite before smiling. That might be the best cookie I have ever tasted. Lily beamed proudly. Dad says kindness makes everything taste better. Ethan chuckled softly before returning his attention to the Porsche. He carefully disconnected the hidden module without damaging a single wire, placing it inside a small anti-static storage pouch from his toolbox. Every movement remained calm and methodical. There was no excitement in his voice, only responsibility. I do not think this device belongs to the person who built your car, he said. I think it belongs to someone who wanted to learn everything about the person driving it. Claire's expression grew thoughtful again. She mentally reviewed recent board meetings, investor presentations, confidential product launches, and private travel plans. Too many possibilities surfaced at once. Then her cell phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed only one name: Daniel Brooks, her chief operating officer. She answered with her usual professional composure. Daniel. His voice sounded relaxed. Just checking in. Did the car problem get solved? Claire glanced toward Ethan before replying. Not yet. A brief pause followed on the line, barely noticeable to anyone else. Ethan noticed it immediately, and for reasons he could not yet explain, that single moment of silence unsettled him far more than the hidden device ever had. Claire ended the call with a polite goodbye, but the brief conversation lingered in her mind. Daniel Brooks had always been calm, dependable, and remarkably prepared. He knew every meeting on her calendar, every investor presentation, and nearly every mile she traveled. Until this moment, she had considered that level of organization one of his greatest strengths. Now, standing inside Ethan Walker's quiet garage, she wondered if familiarity and access could sometimes become the same thing. Ethan slipped the anti-static pouch into a small steel drawer beneath his workbench and locked it without saying a word. He did not want anyone else touching the device until he understood exactly what it was designed to do. Claire watched him with growing curiosity. You seem surprisingly calm. Ethan smiled faintly. Machines have taught me something over the years. She raised an eyebrow. What is that? The louder the problem looks, the quieter the solution usually is. Claire nodded slowly. It sounded less like advice and more like a principle he had lived by for a long time. The afternoon light stretched across the concrete floor as customers gradually returned to their routines. The small crowd that had gathered around the Porsche lost interest once there was no dramatic argument or public confrontation. Maple Ridge quietly returned to being itself. Ethan preferred it that way. Attention often hid the details that mattered most. He reopened the engine compartment and carefully compared the original wiring with the factory service diagram stored on an aging tablet. Every connector matched the official specifications except for one nearly invisible extension leading toward the hidden compartment. It had been installed so cleanly that even experienced technicians would likely assume it belonged there. Claire stepped closer again. Can you tell how long it has been inside the car? Ethan examined the insulation surrounding the additional wire before answering. Long enough for dust and engine heat to settle naturally. This was not placed there yesterday. Claire quietly calculated the past several months. She had visited corporate headquarters in Seattle, attended investor conferences in New York, spoken at technology events in Austin, and traveled to Washington for meetings with federal research partners. The realization made her uneasy. If someone had been collecting information during all those trips, they might know far more about her business than she had ever imagined. Lily walked over carrying a small notebook from the office desk. Dad, you always tell me to write down clues before I forget them. Ethan smiled proudly. That is exactly right. She handed him the notebook, and he began listing every unusual detail in careful handwriting instead of relying on memory alone. Claire noticed there were no assumptions on the page, only verified observations. Time, location, component markings, wide routing, connector type. Nothing more, nothing less. You document everything, she observed. Ethan nodded. Facts deserve patience. Conclusions should earn their place. Claire quietly admired that discipline. Inside corporate boardrooms, people often rushed toward the answer that best supported their own interests. Ethan seemed interested only in the truth, wherever it eventually led. A gentle breeze drifted through the open garage, carrying the scent of pine trees from the hills beyond town. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful again. Then Ethan noticed something reflected in the polished side mirror of the Porsche. A dark sport utility vehicle had been parked across the street for nearly 20 minutes. It had not purchased fuel. No one had entered the grocery store beside it. The driver remained inside, partially hidden behind tinted windows. Ethan did not point it out immediately. Instead, he casually picked up another wrench and continued working as though nothing had changed. Quiet observation had protected him more than quick reactions ever could. A few seconds later, the sport utility vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner just as Claire's phone vibrated again with a calendar reminder for tomorrow morning's confidential executive strategy meeting. Ethan looked from the departing vehicle to the hidden device locked inside his workbench. And for the first time, he began to suspect that whatever had started with a luxury sports car was connected to something much larger than either of them had expected. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the pine-covered hills when Ethan finally closed the rear engine compartment with quiet satisfaction. Every factory connection had been restored exactly as it was designed, except the hidden electronic device was now safely locked inside his workbench instead of buried inside Claire's Porsche. He wiped his hands on a clean towel before stepping back. "Mechanically, your car is ready," he said, "but I would like to drive it a short distance before you leave." Claire nodded without hesitation. "You trust your work enough to test it yourself." Ethan smiled. "I trust careful work. Testing is simply part of respecting it." Claire handed him the key without another question. There was something strangely reassuring about a man who never promised perfection, only patience. Ethan settled into the driver's seat while Claire took the passenger side. Lily waved from the garage entrance, her sketchbook resting against her chest as she watched them pull slowly onto the quiet streets of Maple Ridge. The Porsche moved with smooth precision, its engine producing the deep, confident sound expected from German engineering. Ethan listened more than he looked. Every vibration, every shift, every change in engine tone carried information. Claire noticed the way he rested one hand lightly on the steering wheel while paying attention to sounds most drivers would never hear. "You really can listen to a car," she said with a smile. Ethan chuckled softly. Machines usually tell the truth if you give them enough time. They drove through the center of town before reaching a quiet 2-lane county road lined with golden fields and weathered wooden fences. Ethan gradually increased speed while keeping his attention fixed on the vehicle's behavior. Everything remained perfectly balanced. The steering felt precise. The transmission shifted flawlessly. The dashboard displayed no warnings. Claire finally allowed herself to relax. Maybe removing that device solved everything. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Maybe. A few moments later, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. He eased off the accelerator. "Did you feel that?" Claire frowned. "Feel what?" A hesitation. She shook her head. "I did not notice anything." Ethan remained silent for another quarter mile before carefully guiding the Porsche onto a wide gravel turnout overlooking a peaceful valley. He turned off the engine and stepped outside. Claire joined him as evening light painted the mountains with shades of amber and blue. The cool breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and distant rain. Ethan knelt beside the rear wheel, studying something most people would have ignored completely. Claire walked closer. "What are you looking at?" He pointed toward a narrow cable tucked behind a protective panel beneath the vehicle. "This should not move during normal driving." Claire looked carefully, but could barely see what he meant. Ethan retrieved a flashlight from the emergency kit and illuminated the area. A tiny connector had shifted just enough to expose a thin metallic contact that reflected the fading sunlight. It had not disconnected completely, but it had come dangerously close. Ethan gently secured the connector before examining the surrounding hardware. There were no broken parts, no signs of damage, only evidence that someone had intentionally left the connection slightly unstable. Claire's voice grew quieter. Could that have happened by accident? Ethan slowly stood and looked across the empty countryside before answering. Not if the rest of the installation was this precise. They both fell silent. A flock of birds crossed the evening sky while the wind whispered through the tall grass surrounding the overlook. It was almost impossible to imagine that anything dangerous could exist in such a peaceful place. Ethan closed the protective panel and looked directly at Claire. Whoever installed the hidden device also wanted this connector to fail eventually, but not immediately. Claire felt a chill despite the mild summer evening. Why wait? Ethan looked back toward the Porsche with calm certainty. Because the most convincing problems are the ones that appear to happen naturally, and someone expected this car to become unreliable only after it had traveled far away from anyone who might recognize that it had been carefully planned. The drive back to Maple Ridge felt different. Neither Ethan nor Claire rushed to fill the silence, because both understood that answers often arrived more quietly than questions. The Porsche moved flawlessly now, every system responding exactly as its engineers had intended. Yet the peace inside the cabin came from something far more valuable than mechanical precision. It came from knowing that hidden problems had finally been brought into the light. As they rolled into Ethan's garage, the last rays of sunlight settled across the weathered wooden sign above the entrance. Lily looked up from her sketchbook and smiled the moment she saw them return. "Everything sounds happier now," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "Sometimes machines do." Claire stepped out of the car and looked around the small garage with fresh eyes. A place she had dismissed only hours earlier now felt unexpectedly trustworthy. Nothing inside was expensive. The concrete floor showed years of honest work. The shelves held carefully labeled tools instead of polished decorations. Every object had earned its place. Ethan unlocked the steel drawer beneath his workbench and carefully removed the anti-static pouch. He placed the hidden electronic device beside a bright inspection lamp before reaching for a magnifying lens. Claire stood beside him, watching every movement. "Can you learn anything else?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Someone who builds something usually leaves fingerprints. Not literal ones. Habits." He rotated the device beneath the light until another tiny detail appeared along one edge. There was a microscopic production code etched beneath the protective coating. Ethan copied it into his notebook before opening an archived engineering database stored on his old laptop. The computer took its time waking up, its cooling fan humming gently in the quiet garage. Claire smiled. "That computer has probably survived longer than some companies." Ethan grinned. "Reliable things usually do." A few moments later, the screen displayed a list of specialized manufacturers. Ethan compared each identification code until one result stopped him. He leaned back slowly without saying anything. Claire recognized the expression immediately. "You found it." Ethan turned the laptop toward her. "This production code belongs to a subcontractor that manufactures secure communication hardware for private research programs." Claire read the company name twice before her expression changed completely. Montgomery Dynamics signed a development agreement with them last year. Ethan looked at her calmly. Then someone with legitimate access could have obtained this device without attracting attention. Claire closed the laptop gently, her thoughts racing through months of confidential meetings. Only a handful of executives knew about that partnership. Ethan did not speculate. He simply opened his notebook and drew 3 neat columns. Confirmed facts, possible connections, unknown questions. Claire watched him separate certainty from assumption with remarkable discipline. "You never jump ahead," she observed. Ethan smiled. "If you skip steps, the truth eventually makes you walk back anyway." Before Claire could answer, Lily wandered over carrying the drawing she had finished. She held it up proudly. The picture showed Ethan standing beside the Porsche while Claire smiled across the garage. Above them, Lily had drawn a bright sunrise instead of the evening sky. Claire laughed gently. "It is beautiful, But why is there a sunrise? It is almost dark outside. Lily answered with complete sincerity. Because sometimes the best part of the day starts after people think it is ending. Ethan looked at his daughter with quiet pride, then back at Claire. Neither adult spoke for several seconds. The little girl had unknowingly described exactly how the afternoon had unfolded. Claire carefully folded the drawing and asked, "May I keep this?" Lily nodded immediately. "Of course. It is for reminding people that good things can begin anywhere." Claire held the drawing close as her phone vibrated once again. This time it was not a call. It was a secure calendar notification confirming tomorrow morning's executive strategy meeting. Beneath the reminder appeared a newly attached confidential document that she had never requested. Ethan noticed the unfamiliar file name reflected in her screen, and the same production code resting beside the inspection lamp suddenly made one unsettling possibility impossible to ignore. Whatever secret someone had hidden inside the Porsche was connected to tomorrow's meeting, and time had quietly become their most valuable resource. Claire stared at the confidential attachment without opening it. For the first time in years, instinct told her that reading another document was not nearly as important as understanding the people standing beside her. She slipped the phone into her purse and slowly exhaled. "I can review reports all night," she said quietly, "but I think I need a different kind of perspective first." Ethan closed his notebook and switched off the inspection lamp. "There's a diner next door that serves the best chicken pot pie in the county." Claire looked at him with mild surprise. "Is that your solution?" Ethan smiled gently. Not every problem should be solved on an empty stomach. A few minutes later, the three of them sat inside a small family diner where every booth had been polished by decades of conversations. The scent of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and homemade pie filled the warm evening air. The waitress greeted Ethan and Lily by name before setting 3 glasses of iced tea on the table without anyone asking. Claire quietly watched the simple exchange. No assistants, no reservations, no private dining room, just neighbors treating one another with familiar kindness. Lily unfolded another sheet of paper and continued drawing, while Ethan thanked the waitress for remembering her favorite dessert. Claire could not remember the last meal she had shared without checking her phone every few minutes. Tonight, she left it inside her purse. "Does everyone know you here?" she asked. Ethan shrugged with an easy smile. "Most people know the garage. I just happen to work there." Claire laughed softly. "You always make things sound smaller than they really are." Ethan looked toward the front window, where the evening sky slowly turned shades of orange and purple. Life has a way of becoming lighter when your ego becomes smaller. Claire reflected on those words longer than she expected. She had spent years building a company that employed thousands of people, yet this quiet mechanic measured success by completely different standards. Lily suddenly looked up from her drawing. "Dad, what was Mom's favorite pie?" Ethan's smile became softer, touched by memory instead of sadness. "Apple with cinnamon. She always said simple things lasted the longest." Lily nodded happily and colored another corner of her picture. Claire remained respectfully silent, sensing the quiet love that still lived inside Ethan's memories. There was no bitterness in his voice, only gratitude for the years they had shared. She admired that more than any speech she had ever heard at a leadership conference. After dinner, they walked the short distance back to the garage beneath strings of small lights hanging across Main Street. The town had grown wonderfully quiet. Store owners locked their doors. Families strolled along the sidewalks. Somewhere nearby, someone played an old country song on an acoustic guitar. Claire paused outside the garage and looked toward the modest house behind it where a porch light had just come on. "You build a peaceful life," she said. Ethan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. "Peace usually grows one ordinary day at a time." Claire smiled, feeling those words settle deeply inside her heart. Before leaving, Lily handed her one final drawing. This one showed 3 people standing beneath a bright sunrise beside a little garage, while a silver sport car rested quietly in the background instead of taking center stage. Claire folded the picture with extraordinary care. She realized that for the first time in many years, someone had seen her not as a billionaire, not as a chief executive officer, but simply as another person searching for truth. As she prepared to drive back to her hotel, her phone displayed a new message from Daniel Brooks. It contained only one sentence. "Please arrive 30 minutes early tomorrow. We need to discuss something before the board meeting begins." Claire read the message once before looking at Ethan, and without either of them saying it aloud, they both understood that tomorrow would reveal whether trust had been misplaced for months or whether the quiet discoveries inside a small-town garage were about to change far more than a single luxury car. The next morning arrived wrapped in cool mountain air and a sky so clear it seemed to promise honesty. Claire left Maple Ridge before sunrise, but Lily's drawing remained carefully folded inside her leather portfolio beside confidential business papers worth millions of dollars. Strangely, it was the drawing she checked twice before entering Montgomery Dynamics headquarters in Denver. The boardroom buzzed with quiet conversations as executives reviewed reports and greeted investors. Daniel Brooks welcomed everyone with his usual polished confidence. Yet Claire noticed something she had overlooked for years. Every important discussion naturally flowed through him before reaching anyone else. Every confidential schedule passed across his desk. Every executive vehicle, including hers, had been coordinated through his office. She remained calm, remembering Ethan's simple advice that facts deserve patience. As the meeting began, Claire requested one unexpected change. "Before we review today's strategy, I would like our technology security team to verify a component I recently discovered." Daniel smiled politely, but his expression tightened almost invisibly. "Is that really necessary today?" Claire met his eyes with quiet confidence. "More than ever." Minutes later, the company's senior security engineer entered the room, carrying the anti-static pouch Ethan had carefully sealed the previous afternoon. Claire had delivered it personally before sunrise, along with Ethan's handwritten notes containing nothing except verified observations. The engineer placed the tiny device beneath a laboratory scanner connected to the presentation screen. Within seconds, encrypted identification records appeared. The room grew completely silent. The production code matched an experimental communication module that had never been approved for installation inside any customer vehicle. More importantly, the authorization request had originated months earlier using executive credentials assigned to Daniel's division. Daniel immediately insisted there had been an administrative misunderstanding, but the digital records told a different story. No accusations were shouted across the table. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. The evidence simply spoke with quiet clarity. Independent auditors requested additional documentation, and company legal counsel recommended a full internal review before any further decisions were made. Claire watched the room transform without raising her voice once. She finally understood what Ethan meant when he said that truth never needed to hurry. By late afternoon, she found herself driving back toward Maple Ridge instead of attending interviews or speaking with reporters. The silver Porsche rolled gently into Ethan's garage just as he finished helping an elderly farmer repair an aging pickup truck. He smiled when he saw her, but continued tightening the final bolt before washing his hands. Claire admired that he never abandoned one responsibility simply because another had arrived. When the work was finished, she walked over and placed Lily's drawing on the workbench beside the old inspection mirror. "Your notes changed everything," she said softly. Ethan shook his head with a humble smile. "The facts changed everything. I only wrote them down." Claire laughed quietly before holding out the Porsche keys. "Yesterday I joked that if you fix my car, I would marry you." Ethan smiled, remembering the laughter that had filled the street. "I remember." Claire looked directly into his calm blue eyes. "I am not here because you repaired a Porsche. I am here because you reminded me that character is worth more than success. Patience is stronger than pride, and kindness can uncover truths that power never sees." Ethan stood silent for a moment as the evening sunlight settled across the open garage. Lily skipped over holding another finished drawing. This time it showed no luxury car at all, Only three people standing together beneath a bright sunrise outside a little garage with the words home begins with honest hearts written across the top in careful handwriting. Claire smiled through grateful eyes as Ethan gently accepted the picture. No promises needed to be rushed. No grand speeches needed to be made. Sometimes redemption arrived as quietly as an ordinary sunset. And sometimes the greatest miracle was discovering that the richest life had never been measured by money, but by the people who chose dignity, grace, and second chances every single day.